Maxx Crosby is done in Las Vegas. I'm going to break down my trade package idea involving Daron Payne that brings the Pro Bowl pass rusher to DC without losing pick number 7.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 sports podcast network, and I'm David Harrison, your guy on the ground, credentialed member of the media covering the Washington Commanders for WUSA 9, also writing for Commanders on SI, and of course, I'm here with you 5 days a week. Coming up on today's episode, historical data says it will not take a Micah Parsons package to land Maxx Crosby, and the Commanders don't have to overpay for a superstar pass rusher, but first, Jay Glazer reporting Maxx Crosby is quote-unquote likely done in Las Vegas, and the specific Daron Payne trade model that secures the superstar for Daronte Jones's defense. All that coming up on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And it's all brought to you by Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Every offseason, it seems like there is a superstar and a team and a bridge gets burned. Sometimes it's the player's fault. Sometimes it's the team's fault. Sometimes it's both their faults. This offseason, it's Las Vegas, and the superstar is Maxx Crosby. And from where I sit, it basically looks like it's all on Vegas here. The NFL has a culture society. Everything is all about culture. It all starts with culture, so much to the point that culture is almost the most overused word, if not the most overused word in the National Football League. And the Las Vegas Raiders at the end of the 2025 NFL season fundamentally went against what Maxx Crosby stands for, who he represents himself as, and forced him onto injured reserve, forced him off of the field, and basically pushed him out the building. And now it appears that not only did he leave the building, and then the moment of that decision to blow off some steam and to get over being angry about it, not only did the Raiders pull him off the field for the rest of 2025, but it looks like they might have pulled him out of their own organization. Jay Glazer, talking on the Yahoo Sports Daily during Super Bowl week in San Francisco during Super Bowl Radio Row, said that basically the Maxx Crosby in Vegas are quote unquote likely done because the team chose to tank for draft picks over respecting his competitive edge, his competitive integrity, something that every scout, every general manager, every evaluator in the business will tell you they hunt religiously in their players is competitive energy, competitive spirit. That's what they want. They want the fighter who's going to go down to the wire fighting, and that is what Maxx Crosby is. That's what he's been his entire career. When the Las Vegas Raiders told him, we're not going to be that team, he basically came to the decision that they're not the team for him because they no longer reflect what he wants. That happened in December of 2025 in pursuit of the #1 overall pick in the NFL draft. They shut him down, put him on injured reserve. Crosby acknowledged that he'd been playing hurt. Everybody plays hurt at that point in time in the National Football League, but that he was healthy enough to finish the season, and the team decided to shut him down anyway. The most damning part of the report, Glazer saying that Crosby didn't just disagree with the decision. He told Glazer, quote, "Man, screw these guys. They're shutting me down. I'm not about this. Hell no, I'm not doing it. I left the facility. I'm out. I want to get traded. I'm done." End quote. That is quite the angry statement. And the peek behind the curtain here is this isn't like Glazer is like hiding in a bush, creeping on Maxx Crosby, waiting for the moment for him to get mad about something. Like, these are messages that are communicated to these national talking heads, and it's something that Crosby is well aware that Glazer is going to go out there and put into the open space. In fact, does so with his blessing, with his permission, because you don't get to where Glazer does by violating players' trust when they talk to you about things like this. So this is something that Crosby absolutely wants into the open space, and that's important. That is a very significant part of this conversation as we dive deep into this, because that is one of the reasons why I tell you that the Washington Commanders are not going to have to go out and overpay for a guy like Maxx Crosby if they want to go out there and get him. So who is Maxx Crosby? 2025, 73 tackles, 28 tackles for loss, 10 sacks in 15 games. So mind you, he had 2 games he could have played, possibly could have gotten like 12 sacks or something like that. Was a front runner for Defensive Player of the Year until he was shut down and put on injured reserve. And the thing that we have this conversation about, we had this on the Commander Squad show, like 10 sacks, like may not blow your shoes off as a fan and when you hear those numbers, but understand this is Maxx Crosby who is doing this without another legitimate pass rusher on the defense helping him. He's also doing this without a scheme that helps him. So there was like Myles Garrett in Cleveland, and this isn't to take anything away from Myles Garrett because he's certainly a great pass rusher in his own right and better than Maxx Crosby, I would say. But Myles Garrett doesn't have another running mate, doesn't have a Robin, his Batman, so to speak, as a pass rusher, but he at least is playing in an aggressive defensive scheme under Jim Schwartz, at least up until this offseason, because the Browns are doing their own Browns thing this offseason. And Myles is moving around. He gets to stunt. He gets to twist. Other guys are coming on blitzes that the offensive line has to worry about picking up. So Myles is aided, at least in some way, shape, or form, by the defense that he's playing on. Maxx Crosby, we talked about this with the Patrick Graham deep dive when he was interviewed for the defensive coordinator position with the Washington Commanders. Patrick Graham does not do that. He doesn't blitz the way that you do in a place like Cleveland. He doesn't play the games up front like they do in a place like Cleveland. They don't bring the additional pressure like they do with a team like Cleveland. So Maxx Crosby is getting 10 sacks in 15 games, playing in a much more basic type of system. So if you put him in a system where there is some creativity, there is some help, there maybe is another pass rusher, those things like that. I'm not guaranteeing you the numbers would be better because I can't possibly do that, but it would be feasible to realize or to believe that the numbers could be even better, and 10 sacks in that condition, in that context, is very, very impressive. Maxx Crosby hails from Michigan. He's an Eastern Michigan alum, did go to high school in Texas, so he's got roots there as well. The reason I bring that up is because there's been a conversation coming up with all this news. A couple of years ago, Max was kind of put on the spot on a podcast that, hey, if the Raiders were just not a possibility, where do you want to play? And he brought up the Lions. I think that's a little bit of that Michigan thing, but Ben, that was 2 years ago, and that's more of a personal decision than it is anything else. And again, like there's only so much he can control in this aspect anyway, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. He also apparently told Diana Rossini of The Athletic, she reported that Max told her that, quote, he wants to play for Mike Vrabel, end quote. So certainly he potentially wants to go to the New England Patriots. That's one thing. Patrick Graham, his DC with the Las Vegas Raiders. He's now the defensive coordinator of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So you can see him wanting to go there. So it's not like a slam dunk. Washington is like the spot for him to go. But I think Washington certainly is a spot for him to go. And Adam Peters absolutely needs to go out there and put the phone call in, go out there and maybe even see if he can't get permission if the Raiders open this thing up and say, hey, we're going to let Max go seek out a trade because you've already burned this bridge with this player. The best thing you could possibly do to help yourself is to get him to help you by going out there and negotiating with some teams like Washington, like Pittsburgh, or like whoever, to try to help you get as much capital back, because landing a superstar will be great for any of those teams, Washington, Pittsburgh, Detroit, any of those teams, but overpaying for one is not as great. Luckily, because of the way this is going down, I'm confident that Washington or whoever gets Maxx Crosby won't necessarily have to overpay to get Maxx Crosby on their team this offseason. That more coming up on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders is brought to you in part by FanDuel. It is last call for football on FanDuel. One final Sunday, one last kickoff, the final chance to get in on the action before the NFL season officially comes to a close. When we wake up Monday, every NFL team will be in their offseason no matter what happens on Sunday. It's time for Super Bowl 60, and FanDuel is making sure that you are right in the middle of it with a special offer just in time for the biggest game of the year. Whether you're backing the favorite, which is the Seattle Seahawks, riding with the underdog, the New England Patriots, or you're building one last same game parlay, this is the game that everybody's been waiting for. This is where predictions turn into plays, stats turn into storylines, and every snap feels bigger. It's the perfect way to cap off the season and make the Super Bowl even more exciting from kickoff to the final whistle. And if you're a new customer, bet just $5 and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if you win. Make it count, because after the Super Bowl, the season is over. So last call for football on FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of Super Bowl 60. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Today's episode of Locked On Commanders also brought to you in part by ZocDoc. Finding a doctor you actually like can feel like discovering a diamond in the rough. Sure, you want someone who's in network, you want someone who's nearby, has availability, but you also want a doctor who listens, makes you feel comfortable, and explains things clearly. That kind of doctor actually exists, believe it or not, and finding them is easier with ZocDoc. ZocDoc is a free app and website that helps you find and book high-quality in-network doctors so you can find someone you love without all of the hassle. We're talking about booking in-network appointments with more than 150,000 providers across all 50 states, covering over 200 specialties from primary care and dentistry to dermatology and eye care. I'll admit it, I've definitely put off doctor's appointments longer than I should because my primary care physician is just not good. Let's leave it at that. Between work, life, and everything else, it's easy to delay that process, and ZocDoc makes the process simpler for you to find someone that you actually click with. Stop putting off those doctor's appointments and go to ZocDoc.com/LockedOnNFL to find and instantly book a doctor you love today. That's ZocDoc.com/LockedOnNFL, ZocDoc.com/LockedOnNFL. Thanks to ZocDoc for sponsoring today's episode. And thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day, every day, to the everydayers that come through for every single episode. Special thank you goes out to you for coming through for yet again another episode today. Thank you to everybody for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network around. If you haven't already, please go check out the Everydayer Club. You got a membership tier, which offers ad-free episodes and more. You got the all-access tier, which offers everything in the membership tier and even more, like daily newsletters emailed straight to your inbox. So go check that out, lockedoncommanders.supercast.com. Landing a superstar, always a great thing for any team to do in the offseason. Overpaying for a superstar, not nearly as fun. And because of the situation that's happening in Vegas with Maxx Crosby, I firmly believe and agree, as it turns out, Ian Rappaport, that the Washington Commanders or any team potentially going out there to get Maxx Crosby is not going to have to overpay to get Maxx Crosby on the team. So Washington, I believe, is, if not the only one of the few parts of one of the few teams in this equation. And again, there could be more teams in the equation. Jay Glazer said in his conversation on Yahoo Sports that when the news broke that Max stormed out of the building and said, screw these guys, I want out, that like 20 teams called the Raiders like, hey, are you guys actually going to move this dude in the offseason? So apparently 20 teams or more could potentially be interested in him. But the Las Vegas Raiders need something. They need to hit the spending floor of actual cash without overpaying mediocre free agents. So you can give them a guy who's going to help them spend some money, but isn't bottom of the barrel. That guy is Daron Payne, because this contract that we've all been talking about in Washington with Daron Payne is going to pay him around $28 million this year, helps the Las Vegas Raiders because they're going to give up about $30 million in actual spending for Maxx Crosby to go somewhere else. You replace that with a player, you replace it with a little bit of draft pick. So my specific package that I'm offering the Las Vegas Raiders, if I'm opening up conversation, if I'm Adam Peters, is this: Daron Payne, the 71st overall pick in the 2026 NFL draft, which is the 3rd round pick, and the number 197th overall pick in the 6th round, which will be later because the compensatory picks have not been identified yet. So that pick will be pushed into the 200s at some point in time, but it's a 6th round pick nonetheless. And then the Washington Commanders receive defensive end Maxx Crosby. You also receive all of his contracts. You take all $30.8 million, every little penny. The Raiders don't have to pay Maxx Crosby anything or keep any dead cap. You take everything. In modern NFL trading, more and more, taking parts of or the entire salary has been a very common thread, and it's something that helps teams lower the draft compensation that other teams can ask for. So this allows Vegas to clear salary cap space without the dead cap hanging over, but then they get to spend the real cash on Daron Payne, who they will hope will be what Christian Wilkins was going to be for them when Christian Wilkins ended up not being that for them. Then they can get a 3rd round pick on top of it. They can get a 6th round pick on top of it and go out there, and maybe they spend their 1st round pick. Well, not going to spend that 1st round pick, but maybe they spend some other high draft capital on an edge, something. I don't know what the Raiders are going to do. That's not my business. But for the Washington Commanders, it protects number 7. You get Maxx Crosby, and you do it without having to overpay. So you look at like trade value charts, draft pick trade value charts. Daron Payne, you basically roughly estimate him at about 160 points. Pick number 71 comes in at 68 points on the Rich Hill chart. Pick 197 comes in at 7 points. Even though it's going to get kicked down, you're talking like 4 or 5 points. It's not that big of a difference. Total value is 235 points. Maxx Crosby, his market value, when you compare him, and I did it for you, I'm not going to break down all the algorithms, but we went through some other defensive ends, some outside linebackers that have been traded, like Bradley Chubb, like Montez Sweat, and other guys, and basically said from those trades, right? So you got like Montez Sweat for a second round pick, that means that he was equal to this many points in draft value or trade value. Bradley Chubb was traded for picks and a player. So like what's that value? Basically Maxx Crosby in like comparison to production and age and salary would be worth about 250 points. So the Washington Commanders are going to give up about 235 points in value between Daron Payne and the draft picks, but then they're also going to erase that 15-point gap by taking the money from Maxx Crosby's contract completely on their books so that the Las Vegas Raiders don't have to account for it. And the Washington Commanders can get that done. And the Raiders get their spending floor fixed by getting a new contract with Daron Payne that they can then pay all that money for, because none of that is guaranteed. So none of that stays in Washington. It all goes to Vegas with them. And again, 2 picks for a player that you don't want, or not that you don't want, but that doesn't want to play for you anymore. One of the original offers I had sent out there into the stratosphere, I sent this to all of the insiders on subtext. I text this all to you guys, was number 7 straight up for Maxx Crosby and their for a second round pick, which is number 36 overall. So it's the 4th pick of the second round. So number 7, Washington Commanders first round pick to the Las Vegas Raiders for Maxx Crosby, number 36. And in theory, you get Maxx Crosby, obviously. And then you go out there with 36, maybe you get Lee Hunter, defensive tackle out of Texas Tech, and you do those types of things. And this one, basically what you do is you can just send them Daron Payne, the D tackle, and it helps out things. Now, at that point in time, this is what makes it interesting. This is the biggest kind of catalyst why I don't think anybody's going to have to overpay per se for Maxx Crosby. I sent that offer to Q, which is your boy Q, host of Locked On Raiders, does a really great job. He's on Vegas radio. He's with the team every day, all these things. I sent them the offer, number 7 for Maxx Crosby, number 36. And he said, listen, he's like, I see where you're going with this. I don't think the Raiders are interested in sending anything back. I don't think they have to move him. The contract is very manageable, so they're not really in a position where they have to do this, and I don't think they really want to do it. Then this report from Jay Glazer comes out. That question was posed to Q about 3 weeks ago. Now the report from Jay Glazer comes out. The information comes out. Then Q has Ian Rappaport on the radio, and Ian says, you're not getting Micah Parsons. He's a little bit older than Micah, so you're not getting Micah Parsons. You might get a late first round pick. Late first round pick is not number 7. So that value is much different, right? So then I go back to Q and say, hey, dude, like, because of what Ian said, because of all the stuff coming out, how do you feel now about number 7 for Maxx and number 36? And he said, now he's like, I think maybe that's something that now they would listen to. And again, he's a media member. He's not in the front office, all these other things. And these front office guys, they're not going to just balk. And even the bidding war type of situation, like, you might get it to where the Washington Commanders is Daron Payne, it's a 3rd round pick, and you know what? We'll make it a 2027 5th. Instead of a 2026 6th, we'll make it a 2027 5th. That's your bidding war, right? Like, you're not going to create a bidding war if you're the Raiders for a player that clearly does not want to play for you when that information is publicly known. That is the reason that you don't have the leverage. That is the reason the Washington Commanders would not have to overpay, and that is the reason that you're not getting Micah Parsons value for Maxx Crosby. Ian Rappaport said as much, and the history supports Ian Rappaport's claim on Q's show, which is great news, like I said, for the Commanders, and we're going to dive into that history next on this episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And this episode of Locked On Commanders brought to you in part by Indeed. If you've ever hired someone who looked really good on paper but wasn't the right fit once they got into the business, you know how important it is to get that right. When you want candidates who truly match what you're looking for, trust Indeed sponsored jobs hiring. Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed sponsors jobs, puts your post at the top of the page, and helps you reach the right candidates faster. If I needed to hire somebody for Locked On Commanders, I would go straight to Indeed. I'd be very specific about what I need, real experience, not just resume buzzwords. And instead of struggling to get the job post seen, Indeed sponsored jobs would help me get my list to stand out and reach quality candidates faster. Sponsored jobs boost your post to the people who are the best match for your role, and that can make a real big difference. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs lead to 90% more likely reporting of hiring and non-sponsored jobs do. So spend more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with less stress, less time, and more results. Using Indeed sponsored jobs, listeners of this show get a $75 sponsored job credit to help give your job the premium placement it deserves at Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL. Just go to Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL right now and support the show by saying you heard about it on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, do it the right way with Indeed. Today's episode of Locked On Commanders is also brought to you by Quo. New year, new systems, and this is the time when a lot of us look at the messier parts of how we run our business and think there's got to be a better way, and there is. Streamlining your communications is one of the quickest upgrades you can make, and that's why today's episode is brought to you by Quo, spelled Quo, the smarter way to run your business communications, because when your team is reachable, organized, and communicating in one place, you're not just working cleaner, you're creating more opportunities to connect with your customers. I love how simple Quo makes everything. Your whole team can call and text from one shared business number, so nothing gets missed. Everyone sees the full conversation thread, and it makes replying much faster, and it makes it more personal, and it works right from your phone or your computer, so you can even keep your existing numbers. Make the year this year where no opportunity and no customer slips away. Try Quo for free, plus get 20% off your first 6 months when you go to quo.com/LockedOnNFL. That's QUO.com/LockedOnNFL. Quo, no missed calls, no missed customers. We have been talking here on Locked On Commanders about the potential of the Washington Commanders pursuing Las Vegas Raiders defensive end Maxx Crosby. Jay Glazer reporting that not only was Maxx Crosby angry about being put on IR to end the season, but that he has told him as such that he is done playing for the Las Vegas Raiders, leading Jay to say that the team and the player are likely done. That's a quote from him. But Jay also said that he thinks that the Raiders might be able to get Micah Parsons value in a trade for Maxx Crosby. It felt a little rich to me when I heard him say it. Ian Rappaport recently went on the radio with your boy Q, the host of Locked On Raiders, and said you're not getting nearly as much as what Micah Parsons drew. And in fact, you're probably looking at a late first-round pick as a possibility, not even a slam dunk, as a possibility. And the history absolutely supports what Ian is saying. Don't let the Micah Parsons hype cloud up the math, right? Washington is not going to pay generational young superstar capital to get a 29-year-old who's already under contract for the next couple of years. What Ian said was, quote, it's not going to be Micah Parsons compensation because Parsons was younger, but a late first-round pick would be real, end quote. According to the Rich Hill model, the Dallas Cowboys received about 880 points worth of value, 2 first-round picks and Kenny Clark at about 880 points. That is the outlier. Bradley Chubb in 2022 net 242 points. That's about what the Maxx Crosby mark is going to be. Montez Sweat brought in 180 points. Brian Burns brought in 164 points. And Brian Burns is really the biggest case study here, because if you go back to all these trades, Bradley Chubb, Micah Parsons, Montez Sweat, the thing that you remember, at least specifically about Parsons and Sweat, I don't really remember the Chubb conversation, to be completely quite honest with you, but Parsons and Sweat, the thing that you have to give the Cowboys credit for is, yeah, they had this entire offseason drama about the contract and all this other stuff, but when it came time for everybody to realize, like, oh, the Cowboys might actually make a trade here, that window was very short. And that window was not super negative. It was not super like Parsons is storming out the building or anything like that. Like, we knew there was tension, but it was not negative to the point of toxicity. And everybody, I think, at some point basically believed the two sides would get this thing figured out. Then boom, we're hit with the trade. The difference there is the loss of leverage. There's no public, toxicity. Like I said, like, again, there's stress, there's drama, sure, but there's not toxicity. Montez Sweat, even with everything going on in Washington, even with all of us talking about like Montez Sweat's probably gonna be traded, all this stuff, there wasn't that toxic thing. Like, Montez wasn't in the quotes or on the radio talking, toxic stuff in the public space. The difference between that and Brian Burns is the case study here, because that divorce was very public. It was very toxic. And I'm not saying like Brian was out here on like all the podcasts talking trash about the Panthers and anything like this, but by the time the Panthers actually traded him, they got a 2nd rounder and a 5th rounder for one of the best young pass rushers in the National Football League, because by the time they actually traded him, that relationship had disintegrated so badly that every other GM and owner in the NFL was looking at the Panthers saying, listen, you can either not have Brian Burns and also not have draft picks, or you can not have Brian Burns, but you can have some draft picks, because you're not keeping Brian Burns. This isn't a situation where if you just decide, I've seen some Raiders fans say like, well, Max can want what he wants, but at the end of the day, the Raiders control things. If you don't think Maxx Crosby is the type of dude to stand on his principles and say, no, I'm not playing for an organization that's willing to tank for draft picks and mean it, then I don't think you've been paying attention to Maxx Crosby. If he is that kind of a dude, then I have been buying into Maxx Crosby too much, and I'm wrong about who this person is. I'm pretty confident in what I think Maxx Crosby is or who I think Maxx Crosby is, so I don't see Max doing that, and that means that price point is going to come down. Also, Maxx Crosby, again, a little bit older. That's certainly going to matter. And again, if the Washington Commanders take all of the money left on Max's deal, so the Raiders don't have to deal with any dead money, all those types of things, that obviously matters as well. So those are the case studies that I think really impact what's going to happen here with Max. Again, no slam dunk here for Washington, no guarantee that it's Washington. But for me, if you send Daron Payne, if you can offer up Daron Payne, 3rd-round pick and a 6th-round pick, you get the Raiders to bite on that. You bring in Maxx Crosby. Now you've got number 7. And there's actually some other ideas of what you can do for number 7. And I'm going to jump into that in another episode because unfortunately for this episode, we're done. But this is what we wanted to accomplish in this first episode. There will be another episode that builds off of this one. So that'll be on the next one. So make sure you are subscribed. Follow along with Locked On Commanders so you get all the latest episodes. And you can also follow me on X at DHarrison82 or on Instagram at DHarrison_82. And if you never miss an episode, the Everydayer Club is literally built for you. Go to lockedoncommanders.supercast.com to check out that today. For your next listen, make sure you check out the Locked On NFL podcast. And oh, by the way, make sure you check out the Locked On Wizards podcast. DC sports fans, Anthony Davis coming to the Washington Wizards. Locked On Wizards guys have been all over that news, covering it from end to end. So make sure you go check out the Locked On Wizards guys. To the Everydayers here, I see you. I appreciate you every single day. And I thank you again for coming through yet again today. And until next time, everybody out there, please stay safe, be kind to one another. We'll talk again real soon right here on Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.